At the beginning of World War II, Douglas was the main supplier of bombers and torpedo bombers for American carrier aviation. At that time, U.S. carriers operated 2-seat Dauntless dive bombers and 3-seat Devastator torpedo bombers. The Dauntless performed especially well in combat, and later historians ranked it among the best dive bombers of the Second World War. However, both of these aircraft, developed according to the 1934 competition requirements, were already obsolete by the middle of the war. They were replaced by the Curtiss Helldiver dive bomber and the Grumman Avenger torpedo bomber, thus pushing Douglas out of the list of carrier strike aircraft suppliers. In the mid-1940s, Douglas attempted to regain its lost positions by developing two new aircraft, the Destroyer and the Sky Pirate. Experimental prototypes of these machines were ordered by the Navy in 1943. The Destroyer, powered by a 2,300 horsepower engine, was considered the successor to the old Devastator. The aircraft had an unusual tricycle landing gear with a nose wheel for a carrier-based plane of that time and a reverse gull wing. This wing type was used in U.S. carrier aviation for the second time. It not only improved the stability of the dive bomber, but also reduced the size of the main landing gear struts. The aircraft carried powerful defensive armament consisting of two remotely controlled turrets mounted above and below the fuselage. The Sky Pirate torpedo bomber was developed as a replacement for the Avenger, using the same landing gear arrangement as the Destroyer. The Sky Pirate differed by its larger dimensions and a classic wing shape. Its main feature was the power plant, the most powerful piston engine of its time, a 28-cylinder monster from Pratt & Whitney combined with two coaxial counter-rotating propellers. Matching this power plant was the defensive armament, heavy machine guns in the upper turret and a cannon in the lower turret. Further development was strongly influenced by the course of the war in the Pacific. The U.S. Navy had gained almost complete air superiority, and the need for heavily protected aircraft disappeared. What the fleet now required were versatile single-seat combat planes capable of attacking enemy ships both with bombs from dive attacks and with torpedoes launched from low-level horizontal flight. A new category was introduced for them in the Navy, torpedo bomber dive bomber, and a corresponding competition was announced among the well-known carrier aircraft manufacturers. At the same time, funding for Douglas projects was cut. However, at that moment, Edward Heinemann, the leading designer of the Advanced Projects Department at Douglas, was in Washington with a group of engineers. One evening in their hotel, the team hastily sketched out a draft design for a new aircraft. The very next morning, Heinemann appeared at the Naval Air Systems office with drawings of a single-seat torpedo dive bomber. The military approved the project and included the company in the list of contestants. Alongside Douglas, proposals were submitted by Curtiss, Martin, Kaiser Fleetwings, and Boeing. Curtiss presented an improved variant of the Helldiver dive bomber. In March 1945, Curtiss received a contract to build 10 prototypes with 2,500 horsepower engines instead of the originally planned 3,000 horsepower motor. The aircraft's armament included two 20mm cannons and 2,000 pounds of bombs or one torpedo. The aircraft lagged behind its competitors in key performance characteristics, and the project was canceled. The company managed to build only 9 prototypes, which turned out to be the last Curtiss aircraft designed for the U.S. Navy. The Martin aircraft, named the Mauler, slightly resembled Heinemann's project and was considered by the military as Douglas's main competitor. On August 26, 1944, the first Mauler prototype took to the air. Powered by a 3,000 horsepower Pratt & Whitney engine, the aircraft carried 4 cannons. Up to 15 bombs could be mounted on external underwing hardpoints. Tests of the first prototype were successful, and on January 15, 1945, the Navy ordered 750 aircraft. The first production Mauler flew on December 16, 1946. During 1947, several aircraft underwent carrier trials on American carriers. In March 1948, the first combat squadron was formed. In October 1949, production was halted after only 151 aircraft had been built. The following year, all Maulers were withdrawn from combat units. In addition to strike versions, 6, according to other sources, 17, electronic warfare variants were produced. Kaiser Fleetwings designed a small, inexpensive, and easy-to-build aircraft with a double Wasp engine. Its insufficient bomb load and poor flight performance failed to interest the Navy, and the military paid only for the construction of 5 prototypes. The Boeing aircraft was developed based on a heavy fighter. Its main features were a large bomb bay for 1,600 pounds of bombs and a power plant with two 3-bladed coaxial propellers, which could accelerate the aircraft to 432 miles per hour. However, the design was not suitable for operations at sea, and the Navy rejected the aircraft. The torpedo dive bomber, developed by Douglas engineer Ed Heinemann, became one of the winners of the Navy competition. The U.S. Navy initially ordered a series of 623 aircraft from the company, but canceled the order at the end of 1944. Nevertheless, the Navy still showed great interest in Heinemann's aircraft. At first, the military restored the aircraft's original designation and ordered 15 prototypes, later increasing the number to 25. Thus, the Douglas Company received additional time to refine the still raw project. Striving to establish production of the aircraft before the end of the war, the company's management created a special design team led by Heinemann. It included Chief Engineer Leo Devlin and leading aerodynamicist Gene Root. In the shortest possible time, they developed an almost entirely new aircraft under the working name Dauntless TQ, which differed from its competitors by the high efficiency of its design. Although the technical requirements limited the maximum takeoff weight to 13,200 pounds, the designers still managed to reduce this figure by 600 pounds. The calculated flight range was ensured by a large 350-gallon fuel tank located at the aircraft's center of gravity. In such a configuration, fuel consumption did not affect the balance of the aircraft. In addition, a standard external fuel tank of 150 gallons could be suspended under the fuselage. The external armament was planned to be carried on 3 pylons, 1 under the fuselage and 2 at the wing roots. The latter also served as protection in the event of a forced landing with retracted main landing gear. No defensive armament was installed on the Dauntless TQ. The pilot was seated in a spacious cockpit under a teardrop-shaped canopy. High flight performance was intended to be achieved by installing a new Cyclone 18 engine with 2,500 horsepower, but the aircraft was completed earlier than the engine, which was stuck at the testing stage due to numerous defects. As a result, the completed experimental Dauntless II prototypes were fitted with already proven 2,300 horsepower engines. The designers paid great attention to the cockpit layout. As a result of this work, the cockpit was considered by pilots to be the most advanced of its time. The air intake ducts were tested at the California Institute of Technology in late July 1944. Their design was completed only in early March 1945. The first flight of the prototype was scheduled for June 1, 1945. The lack of time forced the designers to equip the aircraft not with specially designed main landing gear struts and wheels, but with existing ones from the Corsair fighter. This allowed the aircraft to be prepared for flight 2 weeks earlier than planned. On May 18, 1945, the aircraft, piloted by Douglas Company test pilot Laverne Brown, took to the air for the first time from Mines Field. The factory trials lasted 5 weeks, during which the aircraft performed about 40 flights. All calculated characteristics were carefully verified, and the company was satisfied with the new aircraft. Brown ferried it to the Navy's testing ground in Maryland and handed it over to naval pilots for further trials. According to the statements of the Navy test pilots, this aircraft became the best carrier-based bomber ever tested at the center. The aircraft fully met the requirements of the fleet. Its ease of piloting and maintenance made a very favorable impression. Of course, there were also some remarks. The pilots demanded the installation of oxygen equipment in the cockpit, while the technical staff requested stronger lighting in the cockpit and the rear equipment compartment. The company quickly satisfied the requests of both pilots and technical personnel. On May 5, 1945, representatives of the Navy Command signed a protocol with Douglas expressing their intention to purchase 548 aircraft. With the end of World War II, combat aircraft production was halted within a day after hostilities ceased. The value of the canceled contracts amounted to about $8 billion. More than 30,000 aircraft at various stages of completion were scrapped. The number of bombers ordered from Douglas was significantly reduced, first to 377 and then to 277 aircraft. Even such a relatively small order compared to wartime volumes became a lifeline for Douglas. At this time, other aircraft companies were suffering enormous losses. The second prototype took off on May 8, 1945. During its tests, some hidden defects in the power plant were discovered, the main culprit being the propeller, which caused severe vibrations. High-frequency oscillations of the engine led to fatigue cracks, even on the exhaust pipes. The aircraft was subjected to special vibration tests, after which it was sent to NACA for trials in a full-scale wind tunnel. Only at the beginning of August was the second prototype returned to the company for modifications. By the end of 1945, all 25 prototypes had been built. The first 4 were equipped with temporary engines, while the rest were fitted with the first production engines originally intended for the project. In addition to the 3 main pylons for external armament, 12 smaller attachment points, each rated for 110 pounds, were installed under the wing panels. The cannon armament consisted of 2 20mm cannons. In an effort to outcompete their main rival, the Mauler aircraft from Martin, Douglas designers presented their BT-2D as a universal aircraft capable of performing almost all the missions of carrier-based strike and support aviation. To demonstrate this versatility, the company modified 6 prototypes. One was converted into a reconnaissance aircraft, another into an electronic warfare aircraft, and a third into a radar surveillance and patrol aircraft. 2 aircraft with upgraded equipment and a radar in an external pod were tested as night bombers. Finally, the last aircraft became the prototype for the next modification and was classified as a carrier-based attack aircraft. In February 1946, the BT-2D Dauntless Tav-Kung was renamed Skyraider, meaning Raider of the Skies. In April, the BT-class bomber torpedo plane in the U.S. Navy was abolished. It was replaced by the A-class attack aircraft, and the Skyraider received its new designation, AD. At the end of spring 1946, several AD prototypes underwent carrier deck trials. The strength of these machines proved to be very low, and their structures barely withstood the harsh landings typical for all carrier-based aircraft. Most of the identified shortcomings concerned the weak durability of the landing gear and the joints connecting the wings and stabilizer to the fuselage. The weak points had to be reinforced, and as a result, the production A-1 weighed 516 pounds more than the prototype. The first production attack aircraft took off on November 5, 1946. Delivery of the aircraft to combat squadrons aboard the carriers Sicily and Franklin D. Roosevelt began in April 1947. Series production lasted until mid-1948. In addition to bombs and torpedoes, the AD-1's armament included 5-inch unguided HVAR rockets, known as Holy Moses. The aircraft's maximum speed was 357 miles per hour, with a flight range of 1,253 miles. In total, 241 production AD-1 aircraft were built. Simultaneously with improving the production machines, Douglas conducted forward-looking research. The external mounting of unguided rockets on the attack aircraft caused increased drag and wing vibrations. An attempt to solve these problems led to the modification of one prototype. Instead of cannons in the wing consoles, the aircraft was fitted with 2 unguided rocket launchers with tubular rails for 38 rockets. The rockets could be fired in a single salvo within 6.5 seconds, and the combustion gases from the solid fuel were vented through special channels backward and downward. The rockets were stabilized in flight by rotation. The launcher itself weighed 161 pounds, and the total rocket weight was 838 pounds. The modified aircraft underwent ground testing at the Naval Ordnance Test Station in California. Nevertheless, due to the absence of cannons, the program was terminated in the summer of 1950. The last 25 machines of the first production batch were built as 2-seat electronic warfare aircraft. The main radio equipment was installed inside the fuselage and consisted of a search receiver, pulse analyzer, and panoramic indicator. The operator accessed his station through a hatch on the left side of the fuselage. Additionally, underwing pods carried a radar set and a chaff dispenser. In the spring of 1948, the Navy began to receive a new modification of the Skyraider. The AD-2 version featured a reinforced wing structure and a more powerful 2,700 horsepower engine, with modified exhaust pipes and a low-voltage ignition system that consumed less fuel. Furthermore, the aircraft's internal fuel tank capacity was increased by 15 gallons, and a more comfortable headrest was installed in the pilot's cockpit. One production aircraft of the second modification was used to test a new engine cooling system, after which it was fitted with a ventral radome for radar. On the basis of the AD-2, a 2-seat electronic warfare variant was developed. Its equipment and layout did not differ from the previous version. A total of 21 such aircraft were built. One aircraft was specially adapted for target towing. For this purpose, a container with a cable, winch, and target was mounted on its centerline pylon. The third modification appeared due to a design error in the Skyraider. During high-speed operation of the first two modifications, oscillatory directional instability was discovered. This was especially evident in dives, significantly reducing bombing accuracy. Douglas was unable to independently identify and eliminate the defect. To determine the cause, one AD-2 was transferred to the National Advisory Committee for Aeronautics, where it was tested in a full-scale wind tunnel. The engine naturally was not operating during the trials, but to obtain a complete airflow picture, a scale model with a running propeller was studied in parallel. The true cause of the oscillations was confirmed only after flight tests with a rigidly fixed rudder, which had been suspected by the specialists. It turned out that its design was poorly chosen. The trim tab's angle of installation also had a significant influence on the development of the oscillations. After appropriate modifications, the directional oscillation instability at high speeds was eliminated. Production Skyraider AD-3 aircraft were equipped with a new engine. The designers abandoned the retractable tailwheel. Now deck crews could attach a small tow bar to its fixed strut, greatly easing the aircraft's movement on the carrier deck. The pilot's cockpit was thoroughly redesigned with new instrumentation installed. The canopy shape, propeller design, and engine cooling system were also altered. The maximum takeoff weight of this version reached 18,500 pounds. The next 23 aircraft were given a special role. These were two-seat electronic warfare planes that could also tow aerial targets for training. Douglas also created a special night version of the attack aircraft for strikes against ground targets in darkness. Externally, this model resembled the previous two-seat version. From September 1949 to May 1950, 15 such aircraft were built and delivered to the Navy. The crew of the night attack aircraft consisted of 3 men. A radar pod was mounted under the left wing. The next production model was an attack aircraft with a new, powerful 2,700 horsepower engine, developed specifically for the Korean War. In its design, the experience of earlier versions was taken into account. To protect the pilot from small arms fire, the forward part of the cockpit was fitted with armored glass. To ease control during long flights, an autopilot was installed and the instrument panel layout was revised. To reduce landing accidents, the arresting hook was strengthened. The number of wing-mounted cannons was increased to 4. After all the improvements, the aircraft's takeoff weight increased, and its range decreased to 1,240 miles. However, these shortcomings were more than offset by its improved combat effectiveness. By the end of the war, more than 300 Korean versions had been built, and in total, 398 units were produced. The next major series was a twin-cannon, 3-seat night attacker equipped with a powerful searchlight and a radar container. However, most of these aircraft entered service as anti-submarine planes. In combat conditions, they were converted into regular attackers. Unnecessary equipment was removed, and the cannons that had previously been taken out were reinstalled in the wings. Aircraft modified in this way received a new designation. In September 1962, the remaining machines in service received a new designation under the classification system. To enable operations in the harsh conditions of the Korean winter, Douglas upgraded 36 aircraft into an Arctic version with a wing de-icing system. This version carried 4 cannons. In 1959, to help suppress the uprising in Algeria, the United States supplied the French Air Force with a batch of attack aircraft, 93 planes of 2 types. In February 1960, these machines were used to equip 1st, the 2nd, then the 1st and 3rd squadrons of France's 20th Air Wing. Before being sent to Algeria, the night attackers were modified to the standard of the daytime versions, and all aircraft were fitted with additional equipment to carry French external weapons. In Algeria, the attackers proved quite successful, though several were nevertheless shot down. After Algeria gained independence, the 1st and 3rd units were transferred to the 21st Squadron, while the 2nd was disbanded. In 1963, the 1st Squadron took part in combat in Somalia. Several machines also fought in Chad after it gained independence from France, participating in the suppression of numerous uprisings in the central part of the country. In the 1970s, all French attackers were retired from service. At the end of the 1940s, at the request of the Navy, a variant of the attacker was developed for transporting and deploying nuclear weapons. Tactical nuclear bombs of 2 types, Serial production of the 1-kiloton bomb began in 1952. For the first time in history, the size and weight of such a bomb allowed it to be delivered by tactical aviation aircraft. The typical load for the atomic attacker was considered to be 1 bomb and 2 external fuel tanks of 300 gallons each. With the first bomb, the combat range was 900 miles, and with the more advanced second bomb, 1,440 miles. To release the bomb, the attackers could use only one possible method: toss bombing, or as American pilots say, over the shoulder. In this maneuver, the aircraft first had to dive toward the target, and then, during a half loop with an inversion at the top of the trajectory, at the initial phase of the maneuver, release the payload. The bomb then followed a ballistic path toward the target, while the aircraft completed the inversion and flew in the opposite direction. This gave the pilot some reserve of time to escape the target area. It seems likely that even such bombing tactics could not guarantee the pilot's safety. This is indirectly confirmed by the fact that live bombs were never once mounted under these aircraft, and certainly never dropped from them. Most likely, the atomic attacker was purely a political weapon in the struggle with the Air Force for shares of the defense budget. Nevertheless, the aircraft's structure was reinforced against the effects of the shockwave. In total, 298 aircraft of this modification were produced, of which only 165 were specially built, while the rest were converted from regular attackers. In the second half of May 1953, one of these aircraft set a payload record for single-engine piston aircraft, taking off with a load of 14,950 pounds. 12 aircraft that had been retired but remained serviceable were sold to Sweden. Before the sale, their radars and arrestor hooks were removed. The Swedes used the machines as target tugs until the mid-1970s. 2 aircraft were lost in accidents.